Welcome, everyone. It's Lucas here. Today's show is called Improve Your Attention Span, and I'm here with Dr. Gloria Mark. Gloria is a professor at University of California in Irvine. She spent the past couple of decades working on multitasking, interruptions, productivity, mood, and the rise of digital technology, which, of course, so many of us struggle with in the information age, trying to find our focus. She's got a new book out, and the book is called Attention Span, and you can find more about all of her work, including her book, which is launching just about right now by the time you hear this, at her full name, which is gloriamark.com. Gloria, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lucas.
I wonder if we could maybe skip forward a little bit, right into the meat of things. I know a lot of people listening are playing around with so-called nootropics, smart drugs, and they're using, I don't know, caffeine is an obvious one, but then people are taking things like modafinil, or they're using, weird things. People are using nicotine toothpicks now, even health-minded people. Does any of that stuff get excited for you? Is that exciting for you, or is all that stuff just crazy new age nonsense?
Yeah, I don't use any of that. I have to say, the only caffeine consumption I get is with green tea in the morning, sometimes black tea. So I really I don't use any of that. So I can't speak to the effects and costs or benefits of it.
I know a lot of your work focuses on multitasking, and I'm embarrassed to say right before we started this podcast, I quite literally I had to force quit Chrome, and I think I closed, maybe 18 or 25 different windows, and that's pretty typical for me. And I don't do that like proudly. I'm not like a proud multitasker, and yet I do it all the time. Over the decades of research and with this book, what have you learned about multitasking? How can you get someone like me out of my habits?
So first of all, let me correct some misconceptions about multitasking.
Sure.
So some people think they can do more if they multitask, but we actually do less. And here's why. So number one, studies show that multitasking increases stress. My own work has shown that, other studies as well. In fact, when people switch among different tasks, when they switch their attention rapidly, we know that blood pressure increases. We know that certain hormones in the body that are markers of stress increase. We also know that people make more errors. There's actually a great study that looked at doctors who multitask and showed that they made a large number of prescribing errors.
Wow.
When multitasking. So multitasking is not a great thing to be doing.
So how do you find, I assume I'm multitasking all the time, and it's certainly not the first time I've heard it. I can't seem to stop. I can't even cook dinner without listening to some podcast or some news program or something. Do you have any, aside from me feeling forever guilty, which I do, what kinds of things I'm very interested in focus and productivity and quality time. What kinds of strategies do you have for people?
Sure. First of all, multitasking is okay if you're doing two things and one of those tasks does not require mental effort, if it's automatic. So if you're listening to, easy music and doing a hard task, that's perfectly fine, because that automatic, simple task is not taking the resources away from doing your task at hand.
Yeah.
So how can you focus more? Well, there are a lot of strategies that can be used. One strategy that I like, it's the idea of making your unconscious actions more conscious. So bringing them to a conscious awareness, because when we go on our devices, there's so many things we do unconsciously. We do them out of habit. We're just conditioned to do things like checking email, checking social media. And so the idea is to make those kinds of habits more in our conscious awareness. And if we can do that, then we can act on them and we can change. So one technique that I like to do is to practice what I call meta-awareness. Now, during the pandemic, my university offered a course on mindfulness-based stress reduction. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with mindfulness. It's very beneficial. But, I was thinking when I was taking this course, that I could use this in a different sense. When I'm on my computer, when I'm on my phone, I could use this to help keep myself in the present, to make my actions much more conscious. And so how do I do this? Well, with mindfulness, the idea is to keep the focus on your breath, right? And this keeps you in the present, or else to keep the focus on sensations in your body or noises in the environment. And the idea, excuse me, the idea is that it keeps you in the present. We can do the same thing when we're using our devices. And you could do this by probing yourself. So when you have an urge to say, go to check social media, ask yourself why. Why do I need to go there? Is it because I'm bored with my current task? Is it because my current task is too hard? Is it because, well, there's not really a good reason to do it. I'm doing this out of habit. And as you start asking yourself these questions, you begin to understand yourself and you begin to understand your habits, and then you could do something about it. And so whenever I have this inner urge, like I want to go read the news, I like to check news, I ask myself, do I really need to do that right now? Will I get a benefit? And so I probe myself. And at first it was a little bit, I would say, not uncomfortable, but it was maybe not quite so natural. But the more I do it, the more natural it's become. And now it's just second nature. And it helps me think twice about what I'm doing before I do it. So it helps keep me on track.
I want to talk about social media. This is a real problem for, I think, pretty much all of us. And to compound things, I know many of us can't actually not be on social media. So, the idea of abstinence is not really an option because of work-related stuff where maybe for your job you need to be there. Have you developed any strategies for dealing with the feed?
Yeah. So first of all, I am not against giving up social media. Social media certainly has benefits. I think, there's certainly a lot of problems that have arisen with social media. And when social media was first invented, nobody had envisioned the kind of problems that we would see, for example, cyberbullying. So there are definitely a lot of harmful things. But I am not against social media. I do not believe we should give up social media. What I think we can do is use it more strategically. We can use it smarter, right? And so that's what we need to practice. So here's one way to use social media more strategically. So if you're on something like Facebook and you have a friend network, instead of going to Facebook and mindlessly scrolling through and just reading all these posts, and some of them, maybe they're not so so meaningful or interesting, but instead think about one person in your social network that you want to connect with today or at the time that you're there. And it may be someone who hasn't even posted anything, but think of that person and think about how much you value them, and send them a note, right? And just tell them you're thinking of them. And after you do that, go back to your task. You will feel better. You'll feel more fulfilled in your use of social media by focusing it on an individual, a meaningful individual that you can make a connection with. And you could do that every day. Right? And then it makes you see, the different mindless, the mindless scrolling. You see that very differently, right? Because you've used social media in a meaningful way.
I have a strategy I'd love to get your feedback on. I struggle with social media. I need to be there for work. I don't get a lot of joy from it. In the old days, it used to be social. Now it's more like just media. But I've tried to use language to empower myself, to put things in a category. And so, for example, in my house, whenever we're on social media, we call it doom scrolling, like we're all doom scrolling, and we don't allow ourselves to say I'm relaxing or whatever. We quite literally will verbalize, oh, I'm doom scrolling. And my theory is that it puts it in the same category as something like junk food. It's not that I never eat junk food, but when I eat junk food, I'm eating junk food. And and on a more sophisticated level, I try to also label stuff that I'm reading. So, if I end up on Facebook and I'm reading Now This, which is a very left-leaning media, I'll say I'm reading left-wing propaganda. And when the Daily Wire comes up, I say I'm reading right-wing propaganda. And I give it a name, and it helps me to think about. It's kind of like what you said, that meta experience.
Yeah.
So I can think about what I'm thinking about as opposed to just getting ping-ponged, which, really I probably spent a year bouncing between Now This and Daily Wire, confused in my own head what my thoughts were. What do you think of this strategy?
I think that's a very valuable strategy, Lucas, because being able to label something, right, makes you, it creates a filter for you to use when you read the news for this particular site. And it also makes you more critical. You can ask critical questions about it. And that really is the point of meta-awareness, to be more aware, to not just be mindlessly taking information in, just not to mindlessly performing actions, but to actually be more aware, more critical, and the information will have much more meaning for you, right? When you use this kind of critical lens to think about it.
If I understand correctly, you talk about 4 different types of attention. Can you share those with us?
Sure. So let me start off by saying most people think of attention as having 2 states. You're focused or you're not focused. And when I started researching this, I realized that to just be focused, that's too broad of a category, because people can be paying attention to something and be challenged. So, for example, if you're trying to read a difficult document, you're trying to read an instruction manual, you're trying to read tax law, you're trying to write, right? This can be a challenge, right? But you can also be very engaged in something and not be challenged at all, such as playing a game, a simple game, playing solitaire. I have this anagram game on my phone that I play, and I get so engaged in it, I sometimes forget that, time is passing. So we looked at 2 different dimensions, how engaged you are and how challenged you are. And we call, when you're engaged and challenged, we call that a state of focus. When you're engaged, but you're not at all challenged, like playing solitaire, we call that rote attention, right? Simple
attention,
rote
sure. Yeah,
attention. Yeah. If you're not engaged and not challenged, that's a state of boredom, right? And if you're very challenged but not engaged, we call that a state of frustration, which we've all experienced. You're like with tech. When tech doesn't work, we're not engaged in trying to fix the problem.
Yeah.
And it's very challenged, but it's something that we're kind of forced to do because we need to use our technology. So these are the 4 different kinds of attention. Now, what's interesting is that it turns out that focused attention and rote attention, that's this simple, you're engaged with very simple activities, those 2 kinds of attention can work very well with each other, hand in hand. They're supporting actors of each other, in the sense that if you have to do, let's say I write, so I write, let's say an article, and when I start to get a little bit tired, my resources, my cognitive resources are starting to drain, I can step back and I can do some rote activity to replenish myself, right? And this is, some of the greatest writers and even scientists and philosophers have used rote activity in this way to be able to replenish, to step back, and let themselves, let their resources, replenish for a bit, because then you can come back to your task with fresh eyes, right? And you can see things a lot more clearly. You've got, a mind that's full now, full of resources.
And where would exercise fall in terms of engagement, focus? Would, if it were, let's just say like a walk break, how might that fall under?
Yeah, I would say that it's a kind of rote activity, because it's you're engaged, it's easy.
Yeah.
In fact, walking is the best break of all that you can take. There are studies that show even a 20-minute walk in nature can lead people to generate more ideas. So it's called divergent thinking. And their ability to do divergent thinking has increased. And it's just a wonderful break. And if you can't take a walk outside, and I realize that some of the listeners at this time may be faced with some pretty bad weather where they are, so it's not always easy to just simply step outside, but you can stand up and stretch, which is really great to help you replenish. And if you can't do that, you can do some simple activity that keeps your mind engaged. And the benefit is that it allows ideas to incubate in the back of your mind. You're keeping your mind lightly engaged with something that's easy. You can let ideas kind of simmer on the back burner of your mind.
One of the ideas that's been in the zeitgeist now for 5 or 7 years is this idea of flow states. And I had Stephen Kotler on the podcast many years ago, and he talked about all these different ways to engineer flow. And I got really excited about it. And because obviously we've all experienced flow, you go to work and 12 hours later you walk out, it was the day. Unfortunately, I've never been able to engineer any of this stuff. I've been, it's a Tuesday here today. I've been working now for about 9 hours. I bet I've done about 45 minutes of productive work. It's been a pretty rough day. I'll end up fine. But, this is very typical. I'll have a day where I might get 6 hours of work done, 8 hours of work done, and then other days where I'll work for 12 hours and get an hour of work done. What are your thoughts on, I guess, a two-part question? Is this flow thing something we can engineer? And number two, what's realistic expectations? I've really lowered mine. I have a long work day, but I don't get that much done. I just kind of struggle with my brain for off and on for many, many hours, and then, hopefully walk away with something that I'm satisfied with.
Well, Lucas, you are not alone. And there is a lot of hype about flow. And I will say, in having studied knowledge workers for many years, almost 2 decades, and talking with hundreds and hundreds of people, it is very rare to achieve a flow state if you do any kind of knowledge work. What do we mean by knowledge work? It's where your primary task deals with information, and these days it's typically digital information of some kind. It's the nature of the work that makes it very hard to get into flow. You're in a state of focus probably for much of the day, but you haven't gone that extra step to flow. But if you were an artist, a writer, play sports, maybe when you do exercise and yoga, you probably can easier get into a flow state. Before I studied psychology, I was an artist. I could readily get into flow when I was painting. It was the nature of the work I was doing. Right, but flow in knowledge work is really hard. If you're a coder and you're doing complex code, yes, maybe you can get into flow. If you're playing video games online, if you're composing music online, yes, maybe you can get into flow. But for most of the typical day-to-day work that people do, flow is really hard to achieve. It's rare. We shouldn't expect to do it.
Yeah.
But let me tell you an alternative, right? instead of striving for flow, let's strive to understand our own personal rhythms of cognitive resources, which means what is our own personal rhythm of when our focus is at its peak and when it's in a valley. And everyone has a personal rhythm of having times of being focused, times of not being focused. For most people, we found that peak focus is about 11 a.m. and about 3 p.m. For some people, it's earlier. For some, it's later. Depends on your chronotype. Are you an early type, a late type? And so strive instead to discover what your peak focus times are and plan your day to do work around, hard work that requires creativity around those times.
And the second part of the question, which I kind of buried, but what is a realistic work day? I mean, many of us try to work for 8 hours. Many of people like me pretend we're working for 12 hours. What is like a realistic for a knowledge worker? How should people, do you believe in this 4-day work week? Do you believe in an 8? Any thoughts on the way the day is structured, sensical, nonsensical?
Yeah. So I think it's really important. The way that I would express this is to be aware of your own abilities, your own resources, level of resources. You start your day, if you have the luxury to be able to start your day when you can, right? You start at when you're, of course, after a good night's sleep, when you're replenished. And probably you want to start your day doing something light and easy, some kind of rote activity before you ramp up and start doing something very focused. Now, here's the key. Instead of putting a number and saying, well, my day should be 6 hours, my day should be 8 hours, look inwardly and understand what your own capability is, what your own attentional capacity is, and gear your day around that. So, and make sure to take plenty of good, healthy breaks, right, to keep yourself replenished. And then you'll actually be more productive. So in some ways, doing less enables you to do more, right? So you don't want to work to a point where you get burnt out and emotionally exhausted. You actually want to be proactive, and you want to stop before you get to that point, because we have very precious and limited cognitive resources, and we need to use them very carefully, very, very smartly. And the way to do that is to be aware of your own capabilities.
And so if you, let's say you were in charge of one of these big Fortune 500 companies, and you had one of these big towers in Irvine, and, let's say there was 1,500 people in the building or whatever, and you as a, productivity and focus person, what would you do in terms of, like, you had to keep the bottom line where it is, but, what would you do in terms of work day? Would you leave it as it is, 9 to 5? Of course, nobody actually works that, but what might you think about based on what you've learned?
Yeah, I'm more of a fan of flexible work hours.
Yeah.
Because people have individual chronotypes.
Different rhythms. Yeah.
And I really think that people perform better when their workday matches their individual chronotype. So if you're an early type, you would, start your day earlier, late type, later correspondingly. But I think that there can be a window of time that should, of course, overlap everyone's schedule. And this is the time when meetings can be done, when electronic communications can be done, because it's very important that people be able to detach from work and also reattach to work. And if everyone works their personal chronotype day, the day can be stretched. And if someone starts their work at 6 a.m. and starts sending emails out to colleagues, there's this expectation that others should be available at 6 a.m. to answer. We don't want that, right? We don't want that. Someone who's a late type and likes to work through 11 p.m. and they're really at the top of their game, late in the evening. We don't want them to be sending messages to other people at this hour, because it creates expectations and it stretches the day, the work day for everyone. So that's why I would say, individual hours according to a person's personal chronotype and rhythm, but have a portion of the day which overlaps everyone's schedules, and that's the time for meetings, electronic communications, but then not outside of that.
Yeah. What's most frustrating, and on the flip side, most exciting for you about academia, maybe the UC system or UCI? What's interesting at this stage of your career?
Oh, the most exciting thing is just to be able to do research and make discoveries. And that's why I got into this field. It's really exciting to be able to discover new things. It's a lot of work. It's definitely a lot of work. I can't say it's easy, but it's rewarding. And that's why I do this, because it's really rewarding, and I love mentoring my students. You develop a relationship with graduate students who you interact with over the years, and it's just so rewarding to see them grow, and you make discoveries with them. So that's really great. The bad side of it, well, it's a lot of work. Yeah. I'm not going to say it's easy. It's definitely a lot of work, and I'm up sometimes later than I'd like to.
Sure.
Just trying to finish things.
So you have been widely published before. I imagine the book is a bit of culmination of past work, new work, all of the above. Tell people, even though with your publishing background, I'm sure this book was quite a hill to climb. Tell people why you put together the book, a little bit more about it, and what your objective is.
Yeah. So, the work I've been doing has been published within academia. To some extent, it appeared in the popular press, but I thought it would be, what I really want to do is to bring the message and my learnings from what I've been seeing over these years to a wider public. Because I think that people can learn from it. I think people can understand a lot more about themselves. I do think that many, many people struggle with trying to manage their attention, control their attention when they use their digital devices. And so I wanted to give people more information so they can understand each other better. The book is optimistic. The book is not, it's not a doomsday book saying, oh my gosh, we're doomed by technology. Rather, what it's saying is, technology is here to stay. That ship has sailed, right? We can't change this whole trajectory. So let's figure out how we can manage it. And I want us to reframe our goal from using technology to try to be insanely productive to instead trying to increase our well-being. Because I really think in this day and age, that's the most important, is how we can reduce stress, how we can have higher well-being, and use our technology along the way.
One last question before we wrap. Have you discovered any heritability, anything related to, conscientiousness and the ability to have attention span, or any personality traits? Have you found any correlations like that? Is there anything interesting?
Yes, absolutely. I'm really glad you asked. There is a personality test that's called the Big Five. Yeah. It's very well validated. It's probably the most widely used personality test. And we have given our participants the Big Five in some studies. And the Big Five has 5 different traits. There's openness to new experience, conscientiousness, extroversion or introversion, agreeableness, ability to get along with other people, and neuroticism, which is how prone are you to stress. And it turns out that people who score high in neuroticism have significantly shorter attention spans when they use their devices compared to everyone else. Now, if you're a conscientious person, you check email more often.
Right.
And so, because you want to make sure nothing gets through the cracks. So there are differences.
So I'm really high conscientiousness and really high neuroticism. So I guess I check my email and suffer all day long. Probably the motivation behind today's podcast. I really appreciate your work, Gloria. Tell people where to find you. It's gloriamark.com, correct? And your book's on Amazon as well?
Yes. Perfect. Please come visit my website. You can sign up for a newsletter where if you were interested in the content that I talked about today, I write more of it in my newsletter.
I appreciate your work. Let's keep in touch.
Thank you so much.